So I really liked in that previous video how they compared resilience to it being on a scale, and how with the idea that the fulcrum in the middle, the position of that fulcrum is determined by the support that caregivers and significant adults around the child play in supporting that child. So I think that really takes us away from that idea that it's an innate characteristic. So yes, genetics has a part to play in it, but us as adults working with children and young people can really have a significant impact on resilience. Now this next slide is interesting because what this highlights here is the fact that it's a summary of the 20 years research that Anne Maston's been involved with, and what we can see here are some really what we call the short list of some of the key factors and the adaptive systems in which those factors find themselves in. So on the left hand side there you can see the resilience factors. So we've got effective caregiving and parenting quality, close relationships with other capable adults, close friends and romantic partners, intelligence and problem-solving skills, self-control, emotional regulation and planfulness, so that's part of our executive functioning skills, the motivation to succeed, self-efficacy, which for those of you who've done our other whole school approach training will be a familiar theme to you by now. The idea that faith, hope, belief, life has meaning comes up time and time again in some of the more extreme examples where people have overcome significant adversity. And effective schools and effective neighbourhoods and collective efficacy. And what we can see on the right hand side there are those adaptive systems in which those things find themselves in. So for instance, we can see the first three of those resilience factors are really embedded within the attachment relationships that a young person has with their family, with their social networks, and with their peer groups. And then going into intelligence and problem-solving skills, we've got this idea that it's linked into the kind of the learning and thinking systems of the central nervous system, the executive functioning the executive functioning skills of self-control, emotional regulation and planfulness. Again, that's linked into what's going on in our central nervous system. The motivation to succeed, that's related to this idea of mastery, motivation and related reward systems. So where we can adapt those things within our school environments, it can have a significant impact on that child's motivation to succeed. And again, self-efficacy is also grounded in that adaptive system as well. The faith, hope and belief that life has meaning, that's very much embedded in the adaptive system, spiritual and cultural beliefs. And then effective schools, obviously that's linked within the education system, the policy, the practices, the sort of the norms that exist within our education systems. And then effective neighbourhoods and collective efficacy. That has a huge bearing in terms of what's going on in the communities in which our young people and our families live within, and how what's the resources that are available, and is it a safe, nurturing environment? What's available for young people to be able to access? So that has an impact on those particular things. And what comes through as a really, really strong theme on all the research we've seen on resilience is this idea that the key core ingredient to building resilience is the relationship kids have. So we saw that in the video from Harvard just a moment ago, where we really saw how the fulcrum is kind of where the position of that fulcrum is determined by the quality of the relationships and or the support that caregivers can provide. So families are important, but nobody raises children in isolation. And this links back to the idea that we've covered in some of our previous training, that it takes a village to raise a child. So research tells us about the powerful impact that teachers, coaches, and other adults in the community can have, who give children opportunities to form relationships and fulfill that critical role in building resilience. And as a result of responsive interaction, children develop simple skills of coping and adapting. So those are ideas that's around how to self-regulate, how to self-soothe, how to regulate their behaviour, and how to defer gratification. And I'll just point you in the direction of this quote, which I think really stands out from Anne Maston's work in her book Ordinary Magic. So the central significance of close relationships has been noted in virtually every review on resilience in development over the past half century. So I can't stress enough how important the impact that the relationships we have with the young people in our care can have on developing resilience. So if we were to focus on one if we needed to focus on one particular thing in terms of how we want to support young people with developing resilience, or resilience in with our families and our communities, and also with our staff teams, it would be focusing on what's going on in terms of the relationships. So that links back to that idea of belonging and connectedness, which we've discussed in previous whole school approach training. Okay, so one of the other things we saw in that shortlist was this idea that the role that intelligence and problem-solving skills has. So resilience does not appear to require extraordinary intelligence. The protection may be afforded by average or better thinking skills that can be applied in novel and challenging situations. And that's a quote which is from Anne Maston again. So what we need to think about then are these capabilities are likely to reflect a human brain in what we call good working order. So combined with knowledge to understand what is going on and what to expect, and what to do or how to get assistance from others who do know. So it's knowing who you can turn to if you're experiencing a challenge, and knowing those people are going to be there for you to support you, and you feel safe and motivated in order to do that. So these capabilities will develop as the brain develops and learns, and decline as cognitive function declines as we age. So these particular things can be influenced by stress, illness, sleep deprivation, starvation, and many other conditions associated with adversity, and exposure could degrade these capabilities. So intelligence then can also be considered to be a double-edged sword in adaptive functions. So what we can often think about is if we're fully aware of what's going on around us and tuned into what's happening, then that can cause us to dwell upon it a lot more and become more anxious about what we're thinking about. But what Anne Maston also points out is this idea that not being fully aware or being protected from some of the kind of details of the adversity which is going on in our lives for children and young people can also be a protective factor as well. So this idea that if we don't know what's going on, if we don't quite fully understand it, then that can also be beneficial. So it's worth considering that when we're thinking about some of our thinking about children in terms of resilience, that yes, intelligence has an important role to play, i.e. if you're more aware of what's going on, then it can be that can help with your problem solving skills and in terms of knowing where to go and how to overcome the adversity. But also not being fully aware of what the situation is that you're in can also to a degree be a protective factor. So another key thing that I mentioned on that short list was this idea that executive functioning has a role to play in resilience. Not as important as the relationships aspect and attachment, but also does play a key role. So one's ability to control their emotions, i.e. self-regulation, including self-management of attention, arousal, emotions and actions, also appear to play a central role, and these are linked to executive functioning. So the neural networks associated with executive functioning are associated with poverty, adversity, trauma, toxins and neglect. And this is more prominent in early development when the brain's more susceptible to the impact of these things on its development. So executive functioning skills are a key protective factor for high-risk children. Executive functioning skills are also central to better adjustment and responsiveness, monitoring and co-regulation efforts. So where parents and caregivers and teachers can tailor their approach to suit the individual differences in the child, helping sensitive or reactive children towards better self-regulation through different strategies than they might use with children who have a different personality. So the development of these self-regulation skills really accelerate during the preschool years, but continues for a long time well into early adulthood. So when we're thinking about the different areas of education that we might work in, for instance, if we're working in early year settings, perhaps the best way we can think about supporting young people in terms of developing their resilience skills is to focus on the development of and supporting them in terms of the development of those self-regulation skills, which, as I said, develops during those preschool years and really accelerates. So that's where we can be focusing our attention on social emotional learning. We can be doing group social skills work to really help those young children with developing those skills. And then as children get older, more advanced executive functioning skills such as self-reflection, planning for the future, these require the neural systems for self to control to have developed. So these don't come until a little bit later on into adolescence. So these are mature skills that happen later in brain development. And this is where this idea of late bloomers in resilience may reflect that kind of late surge capacity for self-reflection and planning. So no doubt some of you who've worked with older children, or you may have experienced this with your own children as well, when they suddenly get into those latter years of secondary school and into maybe sixth form, this is where you see some of these young people really sort of come into their own, and that's where they start to kind of really develop those skills, and they start to knuckle down, and they're able to kind of overcome much more challenges and adversity. And that's linked into what's going on in terms of brain development at that particular point in their age and stage of development. So as I said, early year settings, they can offer a really important window of opportunity. That's how I like to think of these kind of periods in a child's life for the development of self-control. So there may be later windows for redirecting the life course that are tied to later emerging cognitive abilities and opportunities. So, for instance, what we're saying here then is it probably wouldn't be worth our time to try and support younger children with developing skills of self-reflection and self-evaluation, because those ideas around the executive functioning skills to be able to kind of be self-reflective, to self-evaluate, the idea of forethought and hindsight, perhaps they're not as established in terms of brain development at that point. So within the general population, these can be seen as protective factors, but also what we need to consider is where we've got children who are where we've got neurodiversity. We need to think about how that might be a risk factor for atypically developing children as well. So bear that in mind. We're talking what we've explained here on this kind of trajectory is how this would work for typically developing children, but we also need to be mindful of the age and stage of development of our more atypical children. So also on this shortlist that Mastin produced based upon all the research that she's done is this idea that faith, hope and the belief that life has meaning can have a significant impact on the development of well-being in individuals. So in numerous case reports on resilience is associated with this idea of hope, optimism, faith and belief. And there's lots of examples with some of the late bloomers that we referred to on a previous slide, where they report transformative epiphanies when they experience a surge of hope or belief that life could be meaningful. And these may very well be present in the examples that you provided earlier on that earlier activity we asked you to do. And there's a great example of this from Viktor Frankl in the 2006 book In Man's Search for Meaning, which recounted the power of perceived meaning in the midst of overwhelming suffering in a harrowing account of life in a concentration camp. And this is based upon Frankl's experiences, life experiences in a concentration camp during the Second World War. And in this, Frankl concludes that the meaning of life is found in every moment of living, that life never ceases to have meaning, even in suffering and in death. So in a group therapy session during a mass fast inflicted on the camp's inmates trying to protect an anonymous fellow inmate from fatal retribution by the camp authorities, Frankl offered the thought that for everyone in a dire condition, there is someone looking down. That person might be a friend, a family member, or even God. And who would expect not to be disappointed if you know that someone's there looking out for you and thinking about you? And Frankl concludes from his experience that a prisoner's psychological reactions are not solely the result of the conditions of his life, but also from the freedom of choice he always has, even in times of severe suffering. So that inner hold a prisoner has on his spiritual self relies on having a hope in the future, and once a prisoner loses that hope, he is doomed. So it's that idea that we can look for whatever little positive we can find just to cling on to get us through that time of that period of adversity can be a real skill to be able to learn, and is something which can carry us through those dark times which we might find ourselves within. So school can be an intensely interactive experience between the child and the adults around them. It might be a child's first experience of being around adults outside of their own families, and it can also throw up challenges for them in terms of adapting to new rules and new norms which they find themselves within. So schools are uniquely important in the context of where children spend most of their time of a significant portion of their lives during childhood, and that seems to be the case in most countries around the world. And they offer an opportunity for relationships with adults and peers to be formed, challenged, and repaired. They are where children obtain a wider sense of the world and learn from those around them. But resilience doesn't end with childhood. Every adult in the system will be benefiting with the relationships in schools. So how children perceive or observe the relationships and the interactions that go on between the adults, the colleagues, and the parents within the school can be significantly influential in terms of their understanding of how to kind of manage those situations themselves, and how to form those relationships and manage those relationships. So that can be significantly influential. So how we model and how we kind of manage and repair the relationships that we have with our colleagues will be significantly influential, as we've discussed in some of our previous training. So it's really important for us to consider how we manage that and how we model what we want our children to be able to see within our school environments. And here we can see some more ideas around how resilience can be kind of nurtured within the context of schools. So schools really do nurture many of those adaptive systems that we saw on that short list earlier in the individual. So they generate the capacity for resilience over the course of development. So while also affording opportunities for relationships with adults and peers beyond the family. We covered that in the previous slide, didn't we? So schools, then, as we've done in some of our previous whole school approach training, they offer that safe, predictable place where children can thrive. So that idea of safety is a really important factor to consider. So it's a powerful symbol of normal life in the aftermath of tragedy and trauma, and we often see that, don't we, when a community is experienced, it might be when there's been natural disasters or other kinds of traumatic events which have been experienced within a community. The school can often form the hub where the community goes to, and it's a sort of pillar of the community where people can connect with others and offer support to one another. And so therefore schools can be this island of tranquility and routine for children whose lives may be chaotic or dangerous as well. So for some of our children who grow up in amongst significant adversity, the school is that safe place for them to be able to go. And school communities also provide children with food, medical care, and safe places for activities outside of the regular school day. So they're much more than just those the learning environments which they're perceived to be. So they're places where children go and where they feel cared for and offer so much more. But also what we must consider, this is something which Maston always likes to kind of point out the positives and the negatives in her work. So schools can also be the context of fear. And that's where children may be exposed to individuals who bully them, victimization, discrimination, poor quality education, or mind-numbing boredom. Some children find school really difficult. They may, for various different reasons, it might be due to special needs or communication issues or various different things that they may find that schools it's not an environment which they find that they feel safe or that they enjoy being in. So it's really important to consider that yes, schools can provide these things, but also the kind of the risk factors which may be at play within schools. So whilst we can focus on some of those positive things which we do in school, which tend to be the norm, we have to consider that for some children there may perhaps be elements of school life which leave them feeling vulnerable and really challenge their resilience, and may be seen as a risk factor. And we'll just end this section now with pointing out some of the risks that can arise during the school context. So, for instance, bullying. I thought what was really interesting is I was looking at some of the data from the School Health Research Network survey from the 2017-2018 health behaviour in school-aged children, and I was able to kind of pull out some of the figures for the Gwent area. And what came out of that was this idea that what's being reported back from our young people in our secondary schools is that some 37% of secondary age students in the Aneurin Bevan Health Board area claim to have been bullied in the last couple of months. And what we can break that down further. So the Wales average is 36%, and in the Gwent area what we're seeing there is that 33% of males claim to have been bullied versus 41% of females. So that's something to bear in mind there, and there'll be updated figures on that coming out soon as well. The other things that maybe children may find themselves exposed to in the school context are sexual harassment, discrimination, educational neglect in the form of poor teaching or low expectations, the impacts of that neurodiversity can have on children in mainstream schools, staff burnout, so high demands being placed on staff and the stress that they may be experiencing, how that might be contagious for our young people as well. And parents feeling under comparison or feeling under scrutiny because of the sort of the culture that may exist within the school where they may feel that it's quite competitive and they need to kind of live up to the norms that exist within the school. So it's just worth bearing that in mind about how schools, whilst offer so many protective factors in terms of developing resilience, can also there are particular risk factors at play as well.
So, given all of this then, an important consideration that we have to hold in mind when exploring resilience within school communities is the complexities of the system. In front of you is a model inspired by Bronfenbrenner's ecological systems model that thinks about the systems around a school pupil and what factors are influencing their experiences and well-being. It spans levels from the individual child or young person all the way out to the macro system in which the child's life is embedded. So as you can hopefully see, the pupil themselves will have elements about them which may affect their resilience, such as age, learning needs, family context, health and well-being. But they're also part of a wider microsystem that influences their experiences. They're part of a classroom and peer group that's embedded within the school, which is in turn embedded in other larger systems, such as community, local authority, and national level influences. More widely, exosystems, such as those national policies, influence the child indirectly because of the influence that they have on the local authority and subsequently then on the school system. The classroom teacher, in contrast, influences the child more directly, but the teacher also communicates with parents of the child, forming one of the connections across the micro and mesosystems that you can see in front of you. So I won't go through the whole diagram, but if you just take a moment to scan it and familiarise yourself with the different areas covered within it, what you can hopefully see is that there are lots of influencing factors that will be having an impact on how an individual within a school community experiences their time within the school, but also experiences their well-being needs. What the model is really trying to capture then is that because of all of these influencing systems, it is unlikely that changing one area alone is going to have an impact on well-being. We need to be thinking about the whole. We need to be thinking about all of the different ways in which well-being is impacted. A way to think about this is to think of the analogy of a plane experiencing turbulence mid-flight. The turbulence or poor weather represents adversity. Different planes respond to poor weather conditions in different ways. Some are unfazed and fly on without any problems, whilst others struggle to navigate the challenging conditions in much the same way as an individual member of a school community might respond to the same adversity in different ways. In our metaphor, the ability of the plane to get through the poor weather and reach its destination depends on a number of factors. It depends on the pilot, the individual being affected, and their piloting skills. So this might be their social and emotional skills, their history and their previous experiences of adversity if we think of the pilot as an individual within a school community. It depends on the flight crew. So in this analogy, that might be the family, friends, community around the individual. It depends on the type of plane, so characteristics and temperament, the equipment available to the pilot and co-pilot and the ground crew, the resources available to a young person, to their family, to their services and health professionals around them. And also importantly, it depends on the severity and the duration of the poor weather, so those negative life events, and the way in which a young person or a member of staff might use these skills and resources The pilot can't handle the poor weather adequately without the assistance of the flight crew. In other words, an individual's resilience depends on the support that they get from the people around them. Resilience isn't something we can do on our own. We rely on equipment, we rely on other people, we rely on resources, and we rely on our previous experiences of adversity in order to inform us as to whether this is something that we are able to cope with. So what we want to do now is present a model of resilience that we've been working on in the Gwent WSA team. It's a model to help us think about all of those influencing factors on resilience within school communities. Ullman and Hart speak about resilient moves, the kind of things we need to make to help children manage life when it's tough, and also ways of thinking and acting that we need ourselves if we want to make things better for children. And we think this offers the potential for us to think about resilient moves that we can be making to support every member of the school community feel that little bit more resilient in the face of their own turbulence. Anne Maston describes these as being a list of ordinary things which could help promote resilience. She speaks about the importance of a healthy human brain in good working order, about close relationships with competent, caring adults, about committed families, effective schools and communities, opportunities to succeed, and belief in the self nurtured by positive interactions with the world around them. What we were excited to see in researching Maston's work is that actually these areas she speaks to overlap significantly with our 5 components of wellbeing, that of safety, love and care, belonging, efficacy, and agency. So what we're going to do is have a look in turn at these areas of development for resilience suggested by Maston and how those map on to the components of wellbeing that we've come to understand as being central to creating a whole school approach to emotional wellbeing. So relationships first. Schools have a unique role in the nurturing of healthy relationships. They're some of the most socially intense environments we're in for children, parents, carers and staff members alike. And they play a vital role in the development of resilience through the fostering of basic adaptive systems. Some frequently identified qualities of effective schools and classrooms that promote resilience include a positive school climate, so a welcoming and supportive environment. They include strong leadership. They include rewarding classroom environments, both opportunities for fun, warmth and humour alongside high expectations. They include engaged families and promoting positive behaviour that helps develop learning, cognition and social skills. Effectively, resilience is really all about relationships. It's about being safe within positive, caring, engaging relationships and how this enables us to be both our best selves, but also to feel that we can cope in the face of adversity. Knowing that the basis of resilience lies in our 5 components of wellbeing, which hopefully most of you will have already attended training on, means that we're well equipped to start thinking about how we can apply these to our own school communities. We can focus this in on relationships with competent and caring adults. So this links to themes of belonging and love and care from our components of wellbeing, but may also map onto actions that help improve an individual's sense of agency and efficacy. So how can schools promote resilience through relationships with competent and caring adults? Well, we know that the role of a teacher goes way beyond teaching. Teachers know their students. They can provide emotional security, identify strengths and highlight opportunities, as well as notice when things are going well or not so well. But they also influence the motivation to achieve, as well as to contribute to self-confidence and the self-efficacy of their students. And there's also evidence to suggest that outside of the family, teachers are frequently cited as a source of support among resilient children. So we can see a really central role here for the role that a caring, competent adult has in the development of resilience in the face of adversity. Schools also provide opportunities for children to form relationships with adults who can function as positive role models and mentors. And this is especially important for children who may not have this at home. Seeing healthy relationships enacted in our environment is important for all members of the school community, for students, for teachers, for families and other staff members alike. But similarly, parents can foster supporting relationships with other parents and school staff members, and they can create networks of warmth and support and encouragement. And the hope is that creating these networks that feel supportive and encouraging and open will also create a more resilient and connected school community. Anne Marsden also speaks about the idea of committed families, and we see this feature as mapping onto our belonging and love and care elements of well-being, as well as perhaps safety. So it's clear that having committed, engaged families is likely to improve the capability of our children and young people to exhibit resilience. However, we may feel that the nuances of family life are sometimes outside of our control as professionals in the school community. And if that's the case, what can we do to promote the commitment and involvement of families in their children and young people's lives at school? Well, we think we can provide opportunities for parents to make links with school. This might be through formal activities like parent committees or parent carer training sessions or classes. But often actually it's through those precious informal contacts with families that we might make every single day. They're the things that really seem to make the difference and help families feel part of a school community. And so we can't underestimate the importance of creating those little moments of connection that foster a sense of belonging, of love and care, and of relational safety. But it's also perhaps interesting to share that when we were recording for the WSA film, we had multiple stories from staff members in which their school and colleagues were described as feeling like a family, like a home from home. So when we think about supporting resilience within staff teams, we also need to be thinking about this same feature, about how we foster this sense of a committed family. And again, we see it as being through moments for connection and opportunities to show you care. The next factor that appears in the resilience literature is the concept of effective schools and communities. And we've interpreted this as connecting to our wellbeing themes of belonging, as an effective community is a connected community, as well as to efficacy, to being able to achieve what you want to within your school. So how does this link to resilience, and how can schools make those resilient moves towards becoming more effective communities? Well, we see that schools offer a diverse range of extracurricular opportunities and help individuals develop expertise and skills, experience leadership and so on. And we see this as a really important component of school life. The development of a sense of mastery can help support individuals to feel more resilient in the face of setbacks. We might also think about providing student support. We know that appropriate student support can be the safe haven of care and understanding for some students, particularly those struggling with their emotional health or well-being. We also see real benefit in after-school programs or holiday clubs that provide opportunities for play, but more importantly, perhaps contribute to feelings of safety and belonging. We see how prevention programs can promote protective factors or characteristics for families and school environments, and that these help to support healthy development and in turn a sense of resilience within the individual members. And finally, we can't really underestimate the importance of nurturing teacher and staff wellbeing. Not just to prevent burnout and to promote staff retention, but to provide a hopeful, caring and safe workplace for them with a real feeling of belonging and efficacy among all staff. On to creating opportunities to succeed then. Creating opportunities to succeed is so important for the promotion of efficacy, that sense of I can do it, we can do it, and also of agency, that sense of having a choice and having a voice. And this is the case across children and young people, across staff, and across parents and carers and families connected with school communities. It comes up as a really central theme within the resilience literature, as indeed actually it did within the development of our components of wellbeing research. So we wanted to have a think about what we can do to create opportunities to succeed. We know that children and adolescents children and adults alike experience pleasure in mastery, in being able to develop and refine a skill. And what we know is that individuals who feel that they have a sense of mastery over certain areas of their life are likely to feel more resilient in the face of setbacks in other areas, because they have a template, a blueprint for agency, for efficacy, for being able to achieve. We also know that teachers play a really important role in young people developing agency and self-efficacy beliefs. And this links back to our earlier thoughts about relationships with competent and caring adults, through that vitally important role that teachers can play in the lives of any child who they know. They can instill this sense of I can. And again, it's that sense of I can that helps children and young people to feel mentored, to feel supported, to feel enriched, and to feel ultimately that they can cope and show resilience in what can often be a quite challenging and high-pressured environment to be in. What we're seeing really is that efficacy and the growth of efficacy leads to growth in control and a sense of agency, and ultimately this growth in control and agency is what fosters a greater sense of resilience. But we know that this is a gradual process, that step-by-step learning is important here. So we need opportunities to succeed that are realistic, that are appropriate and proportionate to where that child or young person is at in their developmental journey. Finally then, the literature points to the importance of promoting a sense of belief in self, in the development of resilience, which aligns very closely with promoting efficacy and agency again. So we know that we want to strike the right balance for students, staff, parents and carers. Scaffolded learning, for example, is something that needs to be finely attuned to the needs of the individual. Too much scaffolding can feel stifling, but too little can make someone feel that they're never going to be able to achieve the shared goal or their individual goal. We know the importance of having high but realistic expectations for members of our school community, and how having that balanced finally again fosters a greater sense of belief in self, which ultimately will have a bearing on a sense of resilience in the face of adversity. And finally, praise and reward. We know the importance of having your efforts acknowledged and noticed, and what that does for feeling able to give things a go next time, to try again, to get up after a metaphorical fall. But we also wanted to just take a bit of time to think about opportunities for staff and parents to showcase their skills and interests. So perhaps it might be through opportunities to lead in their area of interest within the school community, or taking part in community activities as a parent or carer. And finally, through the meaningful access to continued professional development and the sharing of skills, the opportunities for individuals who have learnt a new skill to be able to share this with others fosters a really meaningful sense of belief in self. Okay, so with that in mind, let's zoom out again and look at the whole picture. Hopefully this image and the considerations of each area gives us an opportunity to start thinking about the ways in which we can promote resilient school communities. So really what we're seeing is it's the foundation stone of safety interacting with the other four components of well-being, that of love and care, belonging, agency and efficacy, and how these then underpin core values for promoting resilience, close relationships with competent caring adults, connected families, effective schools and communities, opportunities to succeed, and opportunities for belief in the self. So what we see is that through all of these factors interacting together, we're likely to build greater positive interactions which foster a greater sense of individual and collective resilience within school communities. With that in mind then, to end this training, what we'd like to do is now invite you just to step away and think about what could be built on in your school community. Perhaps bring up the previous slide with the model and have a look at the different areas of well-being and different areas of resilience. and think about what might your next steps be. Where might you like to focus some curiosity or some action? And to have a think about how you can create more resilient communities through the whole community working together to promote and protect those 5 components of wellbeing. That's the end of the training session today. We hope you've enjoyed it and thank you for your time. As always, we'd be grateful for any feedback on this to support us in the development of further training packages. So if you have accessed it, please do get in touch to receive a feedback questionnaire about it.